The fluorescent lights in Lab 7 were still buzzing when my key card stopped working. I am Alan Foster, 48 years old, and I just watched 17 years of my life get handed to someone who could not tell a lithium cathode from a car battery. Jared Huxley, the CEO's 31-year-old nephew, was leaning against my own workbench when he said it, not even bothering to stand up straight. Effective today, all intellectual property related to the VoltCore solid-state battery platform is being consolidated under Huxley corporate ownership. Alan, your consulting role has been terminated. We appreciate your contributions. Contributions like I had brought donuts to a meeting instead of inventing the single most advanced battery technology on the planet. VoltCore was not just a product, it was a revolution. I had built molecule by molecule over 17 years. The energy density was 3 times anything on the market. Every major electric vehicle manufacturer on Earth was desperate to license it. The Department of Energy had classified portions of the research for national security purposes. There was $2.1 billion in patents, all registered under my name. And this kid in his Italian loafers was telling me my contributions were appreciated. They had no idea of the complexity of what they were stealing. The synthesis of the solid-state electrolyte took years of refinement to avoid crystal degradation. Under the high vacuum conditions of our clean room, even a single speck of dust could ruin a billion-dollar batch. I had spent countless holidays and weekends checking the thermal monitors, making sure the temperature gradients did not cause structural stress in the microlayers of the prototype cells. I had breathed this project, sacrificed my personal life for it, and watched it grow from a scribble on a napkin to a technology that could power cities. The 6 engineers in the room kept their eyes on the floor. Not Dr. Gibson, who had co-authored 3 papers with me. Not Linda from the patent office, who had processed every filing I had ever submitted. Not even Brian Park, whose entire career existed because I had mentored him through 5 years of failed experiments until he finally got his breakthrough. I unclipped my lab badge, set it on the bench next to a half-finished prototype cell that still smelled like electrolyte solution. Jared watched me, probably expecting the usual anger, threats, maybe tears. The script these corporate guys always imagine. Instead, I asked Jared, "Did legal walk you through Section 14C of my original agreement?" His face went blank for half a second. "Our attorneys have reviewed everything thoroughly, Alan. The transition is clean." I nodded, picked up my bag. "Then you have got nothing to worry about." I paused at the door, looked back at the lab I had practically lived in since I was 31 years old. "Enjoy the power," I said, "but keep an eye on your gauges. When the charge runs out, it runs out fast." Nobody in that room understood what I meant. That was fine. They would. See, back in 2009, when Huxley Energy was still a 12-person startup operating out of a converted warehouse in Wilmington, the company's co-founder, Dr. Sarah Miller, and I had written something very specific into my employment contract. Sarah was a chemist, like me. She understood that in our industry, the person who builds the formula is the formula. You cannot separate the inventor from the invention, not legally, not technically, not ethically. We called it the dead man cell protocol. It was a straightforward concept buried in the technical appendices that corporate lawyers never read because it was full of molecular specifications and federal compliance jargon. The protocol tied my biometric authentication, retinal scan, digital signature, and even my specific electrochemical methodology to every patent filing in the Federal Energy Database. Any transfer of ownership required dual verification. It required my explicit authorization, plus confirmation from the Department of Energy's patent registry. Without both, within 72 hours, the federal system would automatically flag the patents as disputed and freeze all commercial licenses. Dr. Sarah Miller used to say something I never forgot. "Chemistry does not lie, Alan. Molecules do not care about boardroom politics. If you build the formula right, it protects itself." She had retired 3 years ago when Ronald Huxley restructured the company and pushed out everyone who remembered the startup days. Smart woman. She saw what was coming. The MBAs replacing the PhDs, the investor decks replacing the research papers, the family name replacing actual merit, and she got out clean. She moved to a farmhouse in Vermont and started teaching community college chemistry. She said she would rather explain covalent bonds to freshmen than watch suits destroy what we had built. I drove home that evening through Wilmington traffic, taking the long way past the old warehouse where it all started. The building was a vape shop now. 17 years of my life, and the place where I had first crystallized VoltCore did not even have a plaque. My apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, one converted into a private lab that I had never connected to Huxley's network. Best decision I ever made. The equipment was modest compared to Lab 7, but everything I needed was there. My original research notebooks, backup copies of every formula iteration, and most importantly, my personal authentication terminal linked directly to the Department of Energy's patent verification system. I sat down, opened my laptop, and ran a diagnostic. The dead man cell protocol was active, humming quietly in the background like a heartbeat. The 72-hour countdown had already started the moment Jared filed the ownership transfer without my biometric confirmation. 72 hours, 3 days. That was all the time Huxley Energy had left before every Voltcore license on Earth went dark. By 11:47 p.m. on that first night, the silence of my apartment was broken by a phone call from an unsaved number. When I answered, the voice on the other end was quiet, hurried, and immediately recognizable. It was Linda from the patent office, speaking in a hushed whisper as if she were hiding in a supply closet. "Alan, they have no idea what they have done," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Jared is planning a massive press conference tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp. He has got Bloomberg and CNBC setting up in the lobby. He is going to announce that Huxley Energy has consolidated all intellectual property for the Voltcore platform and that we are launching a multi-billion-dollar partnership with 3 major automakers. The stock is already up 15% in after-hours trading based on leaks." I leaned back in my office chair looking at the countdown timer on my laptop screen. It read 71 hours, 14 minutes, and 33 seconds. "They are moving fast," I replied. "Let them. Tomorrow is going to be very educational for Jared." Linda sighed. "Alan, I tried to warn the corporate attorneys. I pulled the 2009 contract and highlighted Section 14C for them." Ronald Huxley's chief counsel looked at it for less than 30 seconds, laughed, and told me it was just legacy boilerplate with no enforcement mechanism. Then he tossed it right into the recycling bin. "Of course he did," I said, "because he is a corporate lawyer who thinks every problem can be settled with a non-disclosure agreement and a wire transfer. They do not understand that some systems are built on math and federal regulations, not boardroom consensus. Under U.S. patent law, specifically 35 U.S.C. 271, patent ownership cannot be transferred unilaterally without the genuine consent of the inventor. To push this deal through, Jared had to forge my digital security key on the federal filing. In doing so, he did not just violate our internal policy. He committed federal forgery, which legally voids the entire transfer ab initio, meaning it is completely invalid from the moment it was filed. The company is now operating on a fraudulent patent transfer, exposing the board of directors to a massive breach of fiduciary duty." Linda was silent for a second. "Some of us still remember who built this place, Alan. Some of us know that without you, Huxley Energy is just an empty glass office building. Stay safe." The line went dead. I closed my eyes and listened to the hum of the vacuum pump in my small home lab. I remembered the late nights in the old warehouse when Sarah Miller and I would argue over the chemistry of the polymer binders. We had no heating in the winter, and the lab was so cold we had to wear gloves while handling the delicate instruments. But we did not care because we knew we were on the verge of something that would change the world. 17 years, 4,000 separate experiments, 212 failed prototype cells before we achieved the first stable electrochemical reaction with the solid-state electrolyte, 11 core patents that formed the entire foundation of the company. It had taken 9 months of intense security reviews just to get the Department of Energy to classify portions of the technology for national grid security. And Jared Huxley, who graduated from Wharton 2 years ago with a Master of Business Administration and a thesis on disruptive marketing, believed he could steal all of it with a forged filing and a patronizing tap on my shoulder. Let tell you about Jared. The kid had never set foot in an actual laboratory before his uncle, Ronald Huxley, made him vice president of technology. Jared had never held a micropipette, never calibrated an electron microscope, and never spent a single night in a hazmat suit trying to figure out why a lithium metal anode was forming dendritic shorts at high current densities. But he could talk. He was a master of empty corporate buzzwords. He would stand in front of investors with his expensive suits and custom cufflinks, talking about synergistic market positioning, paradigm-shifting infrastructure, and vertically integrated energy ecosystems. He made Voltcore sound like a marketing concept he had dreamed up during a weekend golf trip. In the break room, the junior engineers used to laugh about it when the management was not around. Brian Park once joked that Jared could not change a car battery if his life depended on it, but he could easily present a 50-slide presentation explaining why the battery was obsolete. Nobody was laughing now, though. Jared had taken total control of the project, and the board had allowed it because they saw the dollar signs. Ronald Huxley had been CEO for 12 years, and during that time, he had slowly replaced the original scientific board members with financial advisors and investment bankers. They did not care about the physics of energy storage. They cared about the quarterly stock price and the potential valuation of a public buyout. They wanted to sell the company, and my patents were the only assets that made the company worth buying. They thought they could discard me like an old piece of laboratory equipment once they had the files. But they forgot that the files were locked behind a door that only my biometric profile could unlock. At 8:45 a.m. on the second day, I drove to the diner directly across the street from the Huxley Energy headquarters. I took a corner booth, ordered a mug of black coffee, and looked out the window. The company's headquarters was a gleaming 30-story glass tower that Ronald Huxley had built 5 years ago when the initial licensing revenues from my earlier solid-state design started flowing. My patents had paid for every single square foot of that glass and steel structure. Now, security guards had my photograph at the reception desk to ensure I could not step foot inside. Above the counter, the television was tuned to CNBC's. At exactly 9 a.m. sharp, Jared Huxley appeared on the screen, standing behind a polished wood podium. A massive blue corporate logo was projected behind him. He wore a tailored navy suit, a red silk tie, and a flag pin on his lapel. "Today marks a historic milestone for Huxley Energy," Jared announced, his voice carrying the smooth confidence of a seasoned television anchor. "We are proud to confirm that Huxley Energy has consolidated full corporate ownership of the VoltCore solid-state battery platform, the most advanced energy storage technology on the planet. Under our visionary leadership, VoltCore will finally reach its full commercial potential. We are officially announcing exclusive manufacturing partnerships with 3 major global automakers and a $4.7 billion production expansion program. This is the future of clean energy, secured under the Huxley name." I took a slow sip of my coffee. It was bitter, which felt appropriate. The news ticker at the bottom of the screen began scrolling rapidly. Huxley stock surges 22% on VoltCore patent consolidation. Wall Street analysts call it the clean energy deal of the decade. The restaurant was filled with the smell of cheap grease and burnt toast, a stark contrast to the sterile, pristine atmosphere of Huxley's corporate offices. But here, the people were real. The truckers and construction workers sitting at the counter did not care about stock options or corporate acquisitions. They just wanted a hot meal before starting their shift. It reminded me of where I came from and why I had started this journey in the first place. The waitress refilled my cup, looking at the television. "Big news for the guys across the street," she noted. I smiled slightly. "Yes, it is," I replied. "Let us see how long the battery holds the charge." By 2:30 p.m., my phone began buzzing continuously with text messages from former colleagues and junior researchers. Brian Park sent a message asking if it was true that I had signed over my rights, adding that Jared was telling the entire engineering department that he had co-developed the core VoltCore formula in his private office. Another text came from Dr. Gibson, warning me that the legal team was popping champagne on the executive floor. I did not respond to any of them. In less than 30 hours, the mathematical reality of my protocol would make any text message redundant. At 7 p.m., a courier arrived at my apartment to deliver a heavy, cream-colored envelope embossed with the Huxley family crest. It was a formal invitation to a black-tie event titled A Celebration of Innovation, honoring the VoltCore legacy. It was being held at the Pinnacle Club, the city's most exclusive private club, where Ronald Huxley spent his weekends playing squash with investment bankers. The invitation was a clear display of dominance. They wanted me to watch them celebrate their stolen victory. I decided to go. I wore my one good charcoal suit, a white dress shirt, and no tie. If you are invited to watch a group of executives dig their own corporate grave, you should at least dress comfortably. When I arrived at the Pinnacle Club, the room was filled with the soft chatter of the city's financial elite. Jared Huxley met me near the entrance, holding a glass of champagne. He smiled warmly, acting as if we were close friends. "Alan, I am genuinely glad you made it," he said, his voice loud enough for the nearby board members to hear. "After all, your early laboratory work was quite instrumental in laying the groundwork for what VoltCore has become today." Early laboratory work. I had spent 17 years building the technology from a theoretical physics paper into a commercially viable product, and he was calling it early groundwork. I looked at him, noting the expensive Swiss watch on his wrist. "Thank you for the invitation, Jared," I said, keeping my voice completely neutral. "It is always interesting to see how the corporate side celebrates." He patted my shoulder condescendingly and walked away to greet a representative from one of the major automakers. I took a seat near the middle of the table where I could see everyone's face clearly. The table was flanked by 2 junior partners from the outside legal counsel, who spent the first 10 minutes trying to explain to me how corporate restructuring works, as if I had not been running the research division since they were in middle school. I ignored their explanations, focusing instead on the menu. The Pinnacle Club was known for its dry-aged steaks and its selection of expensive French wines, and Ronald Huxley was clearly sparing no expense to show off the company's newfound wealth. The wine was a 2015 Bordeaux, probably $800 a bottle. Ronald stood first, raising his glass with the practiced elegance of a man who had never been told no. "To innovation," he declared, "to family, and to the Huxley name carrying American energy into the future." Everyone drank. I lifted my glass but kept it at my lips without taking a single sip. Jared stood next, beaming with pride. He looked like a child on Christmas morning, which, given that someone had just handed him $2.1 billion in stolen patents, was fairly accurate. Tonight is not just about business, he said, looking around the table. It is about legacy. VoltCore represents 17 years of research. And now he looked directly at me. It represents the future of Huxley Energy, fully integrated and fully ours. I set down my fork and leaned forward. Integration is the tricky part, Jared, I said, keeping my voice conversational. Solid-state chemistry is extremely sensitive stuff. You want to make sure all your federal certifications are current and that your digital authentication keys are completely aligned before you start mass production. The Department of Energy does not mess around with energy patents, especially the ones that are classified for national security. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Jared's smile tightened by a fraction. Our legal team has handled all compliance requirements, Alan, he said, but I heard the slight crack in his confidence. Good, I replied, cutting a piece of my steak. Just make sure your biometric authentication protocols are squared away before the 72-hour window closes. Federal energy patents have automatic safeguards built into the database. If the verification lapses, well, let us just say the lights go out, and not in a fun way. I said it the same way you would remind someone to check their tire pressure before a road trip. Friendly, casual, and completely devastating if you understood the back-end database structure. Ronald Huxley was watching me now, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. Some survival instinct, the kind you develop after decades of corporate battles, was telling him that something was very wrong. He knew that I was not a man who made empty threats. He had seen me solve technical crises that had stumped entire teams of outside consultants. He knew that when the laboratory faced a system failure, I was the only one who could guide the team through the emergency protocols. And yet, his greed had blinded him to the risk of pushing me out. He chose to ignore the science in favor of the stock options, and now he was starting to realize the price of that choice. But Jared just laughed it off and quickly steered the conversation back to their projected stock valuation. Halfway through the dessert, a server approached the table and whispered to Jared, handing him a phone. "Mr. Huxley, there is an urgent call from the Department of Energy Compliance Office. They say it cannot wait." The table went quiet. Jared excused himself and stepped into the hallway. Through the glass doors of the dining room, I could see him. His posture stiffened, his free hand gripped the doorframe, and he began shaking his head slowly. He was gone for exactly 7 minutes. When he returned, the color had completely drained from his face. He forced a weak smile and sat down. "Is everything okay, Jared?" Ronald asked, leaning in. "Fine," Jared said, his voice a pitch higher than before. "Just a routine administrative verification issue with the Federal Registry. The legal team will handle it in the morning." But his hands were visibly shaking when he picked up his wine glass, and he did not make another toast for the rest of the night. I stood up and folded my cloth napkin neatly next to my plate. "Thank you for the dinner, Ronald. It was a very educational evening." I looked around the table at the 21 people who were either complicit in stealing my life's work or too afraid to say anything about it. "Keep your mobile phones charged tonight. Tomorrow is going to be very interesting." Ronald caught my arm as I walked past his chair. "Alan, what did you do?" "I did not do anything, Ronald," I said, looking down at him. "I just built my work right, and I protected it well." By 11:58 p.m. on the second night, I sat on my apartment balcony, watching the Wilmington skyline. The Huxley Energy Tower was lit up like a beacon, with lights blazing on every single floor. It meant their legal team and systems engineers were working through the night, frantically trying to figure out what Section 14C actually meant. My phone rang. It was Ronald Huxley calling my personal line. "Alon, let us be reasonable," Ronald said, his voice tight. "Whatever issue exists with the Federal Patent Registry, we can resolve it. Name your price. We can talk about a board seat, full credit on the technology, or even putting your name on the new research building." I almost laughed out loud. My name on a building that I paid for with 17 years of my life? That is very generous of you, Ronald, but this is not about price. "Then what do you want?" Ronald demanded. "I want your nephew to go on national television tomorrow morning and tell the truth," I said. "I want him to admit that he never invented anything, that he stole the work of a scientist who gave 17 years to your company, and I want a public apology. Not to me, but to every engineer and researcher in that building whose work gets erased every time a corporate officer with the right last name takes credit for things he does not understand." "That is career suicide for Jared," Ronald said after a long pause. "You are asking me to destroy my own family, Ronald," I replied. "Your nephew destroyed himself the moment he decided that a master of business administration and a family name made him an inventor. I am just the chemistry catching up. You have about 6 hours before the window closes. Use them wisely." On day 3 at 5:52 a.m. I was already awake, standing at my kitchen window with a fresh cup of black coffee, watching the morning light slowly touch the Delaware River. My laptop was open on the kitchen counter, showing the federal patent database. The dead man cell countdown timer was at 7 minutes and 44 seconds, ticking down steadily towards zero. At exactly 6 a.m., the 72-hour window closed. I did not need to be inside the Huxley Energy Building to know exactly what happened next, but I could see it happen. A mile away, the lights of the Huxley Energy Tower flickered once, twice, and then every single floor went completely dark. The dead man cell protocol had fully executed. Because my biometric signature had not been scanned to confirm the assignment filing, the Department of Energy and the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office systems automatically flagged the entire VoltCore patent portfolio as disputed. Every commercial license we had granted was instantly suspended. The automated safety systems at the three major automakers, which were integrated directly with the federal compliance database, triggered immediate assembly line shutdowns. Under federal regulations, no company can manufacture battery cells with disputed patent ownership without facing severe fines. The multi-billion-dollar manufacturing deals vanished in an instant. Within 30 minutes, the Securities and Exchange Commission halted trading on Huxley Energy stock, pending a formal investigation into securities fraud. By 7:30 a.m., federal agents were pulling into the Huxley headquarters parking lot. My phone began ringing continuously. Reporters, corporate lawyers, and former colleagues were all calling. Ronald Huxley called 4 times in a row, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. I finally answered on the 5th call. "Alan, for God's sake, you have to stop this," Ronald pleaded, his voice cracking with panic. "Everything is shutting down. The automakers are threatening to sue us for breach of contract, our stock is frozen, and federal agents are in the lobby asking about forged signatures. You are going to destroy this company. Think about the 3,000 employees." "Ronald," I replied calmly, "I thought about them for 17 years. Where were they when your nephew stood on national television and claimed he invented my technology? Where were they when I was escorted out of my own lab by security? Those 3,000 people watched your nephew steal my life's work and throw me on the street, and not a single one of them said a word. The system is just doing what it was designed to do." I hung up the phone. By noon, the story was leading every major business news network. Huxley Energy had collapsed. The stock had plummeted 74% before trading was halted, and analysts were already predicting bankruptcy. The television showed footage of Jared Huxley being led out of the glass tower in handcuffs by federal agents, his expensive suit jacket gone and his hair messy. Ronald Huxley announced his resignation shortly after, reading a prepared statement with the dead eyes of a man who knew he had lost everything. 8 months later, I was sitting in a new bright conference room overlooking the Delaware River. The name on the glass door read Foster Energy Technologies. It was a smaller space than the old Huxley Tower, but it was built on honest science, not marketing decks. Maya Bello, the talented junior electrochemist who had quit Huxley the day after my termination, walked in and slid a blue folder across the table. "The Department of Energy contract is officially signed, Alan," she said with a bright smile. $3.8 billion over 10 years to supply VoltCore batteries for the national grid and military infrastructure. They want you personally leading the research division. I opened the folder. Looking at the specifications, the numbers were clear, and this time every dollar would go to the scientists and engineers who did the actual work. "What about the automakers?" I asked. Maya laughed. "All 3 of them have terminated their agreements with Huxley and are ready to sign new contracts with us. Oh, and Toyota called this morning. They want to discuss a $1.2 billion joint venture for their next-generation electric vehicles. They only want to work with the person who actually holds the patents." Imagine that. My computer chimed with an incoming email from the Department of Energy. It was a formal notification of my nomination for the National Innovation Medal. 17 years after I had first synthesized the VoltCore compounds in a converted Newark warehouse, the government was finally acknowledging the work. I forwarded the message to Dr. Sarah Miller in Vermont, adding a simple note. Chemistry did not lie. Her reply came back a few minutes later. "Never does, Alan. Proud of you." I looked out the window at the river. Somewhere in Arizona, Jared Huxley was working at a car dealership, learning what it felt like to earn a living on commission instead of inheriting a billion-dollar legacy. Ronald Huxley had retired to a quiet community in Scottsdale, spending his days dodging subpoenas and trying to rebuild a reputation that had evaporated in a single morning. The old Huxley Tower was being converted into residential apartments, its logo already scraped off the glass facade. I had driven past it last week and saw the scaffolding surrounding the top floors, the letters being pried off one by one. It was a fitting end for a company that had tried to build a fortune on stolen ideas and empty promises. The glass tower was hollow, and now the market had finally recognized it. Sometimes justice does not arrive with sirens and shouting. Sometimes it comes quietly, like a battery draining in the dark, invisible until the moment the lights go out. And then, Everyone finally sees what was powering the system all along. Build the formula right, protect it well, and when someone tries to steal your work, trust the chemistry. It never lies.